Hey there, I'm Carolyn Stransky, and I'm a software developer based in Berlin, Germany. Today, I'm here to talk to you about an initiative that I started last year during Hacktoberfest, which aims to remove condescending language. So, like simple, easy, just, clearly, basically, from open source documentation. So, last year during Hacktoberfest, I ended up submitting over a dozen pull requests to different projects like Jest, Cypress, Storybook, that were all later merged. And I chose to do this because removing these terms is an active way to make documentation more inclusive. We don't want our documentation to make assumptions because a quote-unquote simple concept for one person isn't always simple for another. Plus, if you don't normally have the time or capacity to do open source, or you don't maybe want to dive into a new code base this month, I found this to be a really high impact but low commitment way to get involved with almost any project. So in this video, I want to walk you through the steps that I took and maybe you can replicate during this Hacktoberfest, because trust me, there's still so much more documentation that needs this kind of attention. So I broke it down into 4 steps. First, you want to open an issue describing your mission. Second is to use a language linter to flag any condescending terms. 3 is to remove or replace instances of condescending language. And 4 is to open a pull request with your proposed changes. So, step 1. Open an issue describing your mission. If you aren't a regular contributor to a project, I'd really suggest opening an issue before starting any work. This gives you the opportunity to describe the value that a change like this would bring and see if maintainers are open to this type of change. Spoiler alert, not all of them are. On the other hand, this allows maintainers to suggest a preferred format for the changes. For example, maybe submitting 1 pull request for every section of their docs instead of all at once. Or they can also let you know if they have any existing language linters that you can work with or modify. Step 2. Use a language linter to flag condescending terms. So once you've gotten the okay from the maintainers, you can really start to dig into the docs. You could manually search for every term within the documentation, but this can be pretty tedious, and you might miss terms or variations, for example, easily instead of easy. So I would suggest using AlexJS. AlexJS is an open source language linter designed to catch polarizing writing in Markdown files and suggest helpful alternatives. AlexJS is able to flag the condescending language that we're looking for, as well as language that is maybe ableist, gendered, homophobic, racist, or anything that's really better left out of our technical documentation. There are 2 different approaches that you can take to using AlexJS for linting open source documentation. You can run npx alex within the repositories directory. This allows you to run the linter without installing Alex as a dependency to the project. Or you can install AlexJS as a dependency to the project. I would recommend using npx as a first step. Speaking from experience, asking maintainers to add an additional dependency will take much more convincing than changing a few words in their documentation. So, step 3. Remove or replace instances of condescending language. As tempting as it might be, you don't want to remove every instance that is flagged by AlexJS or your own search, because sometimes these terms can be present out of necessity or as an attempt to be more welcoming, and we want to be able to honor that. So before changing anything, take a look at each instance and ask yourself the following. Is it actually condescending or offensive? For instance, words like simple can be used to describe a specific type of network protocol. So you want to be sure that you aren't removing or altering terms that are essential for comprehension. You can also ask yourself, is it necessary? Many of these condescending terms are adverbs that can be removed without any replacement. I found that to be especially true for terms like just. If it's necessary, what is it trying to say? It's rare for a term like easy to be intentionally condescending. Oftentimes, writers are using them to show that something maybe isn't as intimidating as it sounds, which is great. So if this is the case, we want to think about what the docs are trying to communicate and replace any condescending language with word choices that better represent the intention. So if something is easy because it's quick to set up, maybe we can say that instead, or we can indicate how long we expect a setup time to take. Step 4, create a pull request with your proposed changes. So now that the work is done, you can propose your changes with a pull request. Be sure to follow the project's contributing guidelines and reference your original issue. It can also help to include a summary of what you're trying to accomplish with this pull request, even if it's in the issue. Sometimes there's multiple maintainers on a project, so it's handy to have it there right away for anyone to read. Any agreements that were decided in the issue should also be present, and maybe some examples of the terms that you removed or replaced, because then everyone can learn from what you're doing. This way, if another maintainer reviews your changes, they can gain context without having to read the entire issue or discussion. And that's really all I have for you right now. So I hope that some of you are inspired to make your first open source pull request, or help make your favorite open source projects docs a little bit more inclusive. For anyone interested, I have a pinned post on my dev profile with all of those steps in more detail, plus more tangible examples. You can find that at dev.to/CAROLSTRAN. Happy hacking!